Got a question for you guys. True or false? Valve has an ace up its sleeve when it comes to the Steam machine in terms of performance and optimization. Now, that question is not actually coming from me. It's coming from one of you, specifically Central Deck. They asked this question. And the reason that they asked this question is because I was doing an episode of my podcast, the NerdNest podcast, where I sit down with Fan the Deck, Retro Game Core, and the Fox, and we talk about gaming news. And recently, we've been playing a little game on the podcast called True or False, where you guys send in questions like that, and we respond to them. And Rich and I decided that since we didn't get a chance to answer your true or false questions during the last episode because we took too long talking, we decided we were going to make videos that were answering your questions. And so both Rich and I are making a video answering the questions that you send in. And after you watch mine, there's going to be a link to Rich's video in the description down below that like button. Go watch his. I know that as soon as he posts it, it's going to be one of the first things that I do is watch that. So let's get back to that initial question that was asked. Does Valve have an ace up its sleeve regarding Steam machines' performance and optimization? I think that's a great question. Satisfye just kicked off their Black Friday sale with the new Zen Grip 2 for Nintendo Switch 2. It's in stock and it's shipping right now. Nintendo makes amazing games, but the Switch 2 is an ergonomic mess. Satisfye makes your Switch 2 super easy to play in handheld mode. It's been designed from the ground up for Nintendo Switch 2, and it maintains access to every single port, and it does not obstruct cooling. Satisfye is already well known for making extremely comfortable and ergonomic grips, and this grip is no exception. The sides and the back of the grip actually protrude out, and they properly put the weight of the device into your palms rather than holding it on your fingers. This makes a huge difference for long gaming sessions. And you're probably thinking, well, okay, that seems great, but now my Nintendo Switch 2 is too big to fit in a case. Not so fast, because Satisfye makes a case that's made specifically for this grip. And I gotta say, now you can protect your Switch 2 and you can play it more comfortably in handheld mode at the same time. But maybe this is just a little bit too bulky for you. Luckily, Satisfye also just announced their new low-profile hard shell cover that works with the Zen Grip 2. This will cover the screen, the Joy-Cons, the face buttons, the thumbsticks, because every curve and contact point is sculpted specifically for the Zen Grip 2 and Nintendo Switch 2. And what's even better, it's 25% off right now. Be more comfortable with the Switch 2 with Zen Grip 2 from Satisfye. Check out the link in the description to get yours today. I do think it's possible that Valve has an ace up their sleeve, but I don't think it's going to set the world on fire. And I don't think that it's really what this person is asking. What I think that they're really asking is if I have a similar spec'd machine, will the Steam machine run games better than that similarly spec'd machine? And I don't think that that's going to be the case. And here's the reason why. It's just a PC. And if they're both PCs with the same specs, well, then they're going to run games pretty much in an equivalent manner. And that's going to be 6 times more powerful than the Steam Deck. Valve said, they told us, this is how powerful this machine is. It is 6 times more powerful than the Steam Deck. My friend Carrie, aka the Fox, who's also on the podcast, he made a video testing it. He went out and he found similar spec'd hardware. He slapped it all together into a box, turned it on, and ran benchmarks. And it was about 6 times more powerful than the Steam Deck. So, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, what does that mean? Well, let's say that you're running a game at 800p 30 on the Steam Deck. Well, you would be able to run that game 6 times more powerful. On the Steam machine, 800p, you would get like 180 frames per second. That's 6 times more powerful. Now, chances are you're not going to be running games at 800p. So let's say that instead you're running games at 1080p or 1440p. Well, the frames per second that you're going to get on those games is going to drop down. And it's not going to be that 180 frames per second. So maybe you're doing 1080 60 or 1440p 60. And then you can step in with FSR and upscale your game up to 4K. which matches what Valve is saying that this hardware can do, 4K 60 with FSR. I also think that you have to consider if Valve can ship Half-Life 3 alongside the Steam Machine, because if they can, and they're specifically targeting this hardware, they can show what devs can do with 8 gigs of VRAM. And I think that that is a very interesting ace up their sleeve. And I would give you a perfect example, Nintendo on the Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo Switch 2. The Nintendo games always look amazing on that hardware. And that's because they know how to optimize that hardware. They are targeting that hardware specifically, whereas third parties are usually porting a game over to the Switch or something like that. And the same thing is going to happen here. Third parties are not going to be able to match whatever Valve does, because Valve can put all of their eggs into that one basket, where third parties, they have to be spread a little more thin. That said, I do think it's possible that they have an ace up their sleeve, but I think when it really comes down to it, and an apples to apples comparison, if you have the same hardware, one of them is the Steam Machine and the other one is running a similar version of hardware, and you're running Bazzite or something, I think you're going to get similar performance. Another ace up the sleeve that Valve could have is shader pre-caching. For those of you that don't remember the original launch of the Steam Deck, it launched alongside Elden Ring. And Elden Ring on PC would run into stuttering issues because of shaders. Shaders are like little programs that do some kind of calculation in the background that the game needs in order to display something on the screen. So when a new shader is run, well, now your game is running the game, or now your hardware is running the game, and it's running this shader in the background. And if your hardware is already taxed pretty high, well, you're going to see some stuttering in the game. The way that Valve gets around this is because the Steam Deck is a known hardware target. They know exactly what hardware is in there, and shaders do compilations based on what hardware they're running. So if you know what the hardware is ahead of time, well, then you can pre-do all of those shader calculations and then just download the results. And then when the game calls for that shader to be run, it doesn't need it to be run because it's already has those calculations done for it. And so there's no stuttering, and it's a nice, smooth gameplay experience. That's how Elden Ring was able to run so well on the Steam Deck, even though more powerful PCs were struggling. It's because they were doing shader calculations in the background. Well, the Steam Machine is known hardware. So that means it's going to be able to do these shader calculations ahead of time. They're going to be pre-cached, and you're just going to download them. And that's going to make a much smoother experience. Is it going to result in marked improvement in frames per second over similarly spec'd hardware? I don't think so, but you'll have a smoother experience, and therefore people will feel like it is a better experience, because it is. All right, the next question is from the Laughing Bandit. They said the Steam Machine will incentivize developers to target performance with 8 gigs of VRAM even after a new console generation launches that is able to allocate more. I'm going to say true to this one, but I don't think it's going to have the effect that you're hoping for, at least not for a really long time. And here's the reason why. It takes a really long time to make video games. So while yes, at first we're going to see some devs target the Steam Machine with like presets, kind of like how CD Projekt Red specifically targeted the Steam Deck with a Steam Deck preset in Cyberpunk 2077. I think that we'll see that with a bunch of games, but it's probably only going to be games that have big budgets that they can actually spend the time to make sure that they're targeting these things. That said, the fact that there is a dev kit for the Steam Machine means devs can specifically target this hardware, which is not something that we've ever really had in the past in PC gaming. And I think that that is a really big deal. I mean, we've already seen companies like Larian Studios make a new version of Baldur's Gate 3 that runs on Linux. They literally ported their game over to Linux to give the Steam Deck a better experience. And I think that some studios will be able to do that kind of thing, but at the same time, others won't. If you ask me, I think that the Switch 2 will have a bigger overall impact on devs and publishers targeting lower spec hardware just because of the sheer number of Nintendo Switches that are out there. If a game is running great on a Nintendo Switch, it's probably also going to run great on a Steam machine or a Steam Deck or the Steam Frame VR because the Switch 2 is already pretty low power when you compare it to all the other hardware that's out there. And that just goes to show you that hardware power is not nearly as important as everybody seems to think it is. Because we haven't seen massive jumps in visual graphical fidelity recently, games look pretty good, but games last gen looked pretty good, and the games the gen before that still looked pretty decent. I don't like every time we get a new hardware bump and a new leap in graphical fidelity, that leap is smaller and smaller and smaller. It's the law of diminishing returns. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where your hardware isn't going to matter all that much because everything looks good. And right now, everything looks pretty good. So I think I'm going to say true. Some devs will, but it's not going to be as many as you're hoping for. All right, the next question is, and I did not write down who said this, but they said true or false, GTA 6 is delayed so it will be playable on Steam machine. I'm going to say false. GTA 6 was delayed because games get delayed. Now, why was it delayed? Well, maybe they just ran into problems getting things to run the way that they wanted to. Maybe it isn't quite finished and they need more time. Maybe it's because Rockstar fired a bunch of people who were trying to do unionizing stuff, and now they don't have the staff that they need in order to hit the target that they originally had hoped for. But Rockstar usually launches their games on console first and then sends them over to PC later. So I do think that this will come to PC after the fact, and it'll run fine on the Steam machine. That is, unless the game requires lots of ray tracing, because the hardware that's in the Steam machine is pretty good at rasterization, but not so good at ray tracing. All right, the next question comes in from Disco Gaming. They said in the next 5 to 7 years, Valve will fully transition its gaming hardware to ARM. I'm going to say false for now, but the reason is because I think 5 to 7 years is too soon. I do think that eventually we will transition from x86 architecture over to ARM architecture, but I don't think we're there yet, especially because of all of the other games that are made on x86. There's 100,000 games on Steam, and getting all of those to run on ARM is a pretty big ask. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I'm going to try and catch everybody up with a quick, simple, not detailed, but simple explanation of what's going on with Valve and ARM. I'm going to start with Proton. SteamOS runs Linux. Most games are made for Windows. Valve partnered with Codeweavers, the makers of Wine, to make Proton. Proton is a translation layer that basically takes Windows API calls, translates them over into a Linux API call. Your game runs, and it just works just fine. Okay. Now, with the Steam Frame, Valve has an ARM chip instead of an x86 chip in the Steam Frame. This is a different architecture of chip. So not only does Proton have to translate from a Windows call to a Linux call, but then FEX, which is part of Proton for ARM, has to translate x86 architecture stuff over to ARM architecture stuff. And right now there's a pretty big hit in performance in that translation. And because there's a big hit in performance, I don't think that Valve can wave a magic wand and solve this in enough time so that their next hardware, which I'm 100% sure is already under development, so that their next hardware would use an ARM chip. Now, maybe the hardware after that would use an ARM chip. And I think that that is 100% possible, but I just don't think 5 to 7 years is a realistic expectation. Next question comes in from Evolved32. They said, do we expect too much from handheld PCs? I'm not actually going to answer that question in detail. I'm going to say yes. There's a big population of people that do expect too much from handheld PCs. And there's also a big population of people that don't have any expectations at all. Well, this made me think about, are people expecting too much from the Steam machine? And I'm going to say that there's going to be a lot of people, because Valve said it was 4K 60 with FSR, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be disappointed that is not actually running games at 4K 60, because a lot of people don't even understand what FSR is. So when they sit down to play a game, what are they going to do? They're going to set their resolution to 4K because Valve said 4K would work. They don't know what FSR is. They don't realize that you're actually running a game at 1080p and then upscaling to 4K. So they're going to run the game at 4K and they're going to get 15 frames per second and they're going to be mad and disappointed and irritated. And it's because they do expect too much. I think I said this on the podcast, but I think Valve made a mistake by saying 4K 60. I just think that they should have said it will run games that are on Steam well, or it will run games that are on Steam better than what 70% of what people in the hardware survey actually already have. Next question is from Farouz. They say games with anti-cheat will turn on Linux support one after another, but matchmaking only Linux gamers together. I do think that eventually, once Linux hits a certain threshold, that we will start to see anti-cheat games running on Linux, no problem, because right now there is no good reason for it to not work. It's just because they don't want to support yet another platform, especially a platform that has such a small number of people. So if that number of people grows to a large enough number, then it certainly will start to make sense for these companies to support yet another platform by allowing the anti-cheat to run on Linux. It already can run on Linux. They're specifically stopping it from running on Linux. So anti-cheat will work just fine. They just don't want to. Once that threshold is met, and they decide to support it on Linux, I don't think it makes any sense to cordon off the Linux users onto their own servers, because number one, that's still a small number of people. It will be a worse experience for everybody who's running on Linux, because now they'll have a harder time doing matchmaking. And it's kind of a waste of resources, because now you have a server that's dedicated to just the Linux users, and those Linux users, like, they're not going to be able to fill it up. So that means it's a server that's not being used all the time. So yes, I do think eventually anti-cheat will work on Linux. No, I don't think that the companies are going to make all of the Linux users only play with other Linux users. All right, next up, with Valve taking on Microsoft for living room space, do you think they'll add multi-user account login for the Steam machine? Well, since it's running SteamOS, I think that we can already do that, can't we? Like, can't you already have multiple users on a Steam Deck? I am the only one that uses my Steam Deck, and my son is the only one that uses his Steam Deck, but I'm pretty sure you can have more than one user on a Steam Deck. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. True or false, Steam on Android will be a full operating system and not just an app. You know, I have to admit, I do not know enough about the underpinnings of Android in order to be able to answer this question. So here's my question to all of the Android users out there. Is it possible for an app, not an operating system, but an app, to do these translation calls like we see on Windows to Linux, the same thing as x86 to ARM? Is it possible for an app to do that, or does that have to be like built in to the operating system? Let us know in the comment section down below that like button, because I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer this question, but I'm just too curious to find out if an app can do it or if it has to actually be an operating system. Joshua David sent in, you can connect the Steam Deck as an external monitor to the Steam machine via the USB port. I'm going to say false, and then I'm going to follow up with, why would you? Like, it's a 7-inch screen. It's super small. Now it's not as portable as it was before. What goal are you trying to achieve with this kind of setup? It's very interesting to me. Like, what are the weird workarounds that people make? Why would you do that? And at the same time, you could just stream from your Steam machine to your Steam Deck and still play the game in handheld mode without needing to complicate things with a wire if your network is good enough. Rhodes WR1 says Valve is playing the long game and will sell the Gabe Cube at a loss in order to increase the number of Linux gamers, forcing devs to make their own games compatible for Linux to include games that already aren't. I'm going to say false. They've already said over and over that it's going to be priced like a PC. If you go out and you buy parts that would be the same power performance envelope as the Steam machine, that you will pay roughly the same amount that you will for a Steam machine. Probably won't look as good, probably won't be as quiet, probably won't have all of the features that Steam machine has, but as far as power performance, it's going to be equivalent. So I don't see Valve selling these at a loss in order to, increase market share, even though I think personally that would be a smart move on Valve's part. Next up, quick resume is more important than performance. I think it depends on what kind of performance jump we're talking about here. If it's a big jump of performance, then maybe not so much. But I will say, quick resume is awesome for somebody like me who doesn't have a lot of time to actually play video games. One of the most important metrics in video games for me is time to game. From the time I sit down to the time that I'm actually playing, if it's a long time, I'm less interested. So quick resume is awesome, but I don't know that I would take it over a massive jump in performance, if that makes sense. Meonch13 says official SteamOS is better than Bazzite. Depends on what you mean by better. I'm a Linux novice, okay? I use both, and other than UI differences in desktop mode, I couldn't tell you the difference between SteamOS and Bazzite. To me, they are essentially the same thing. Now, there's going to be people in the comments that are going to be like, one is Arch-based and the other one's Fedora-based. And I got to tell you, I don't know what that means. And once more, I don't care what that means. I'm not standing here doing backflips for Linux. I'm just happy to not have to use Windows. And when I use a computer that's using Linux, I'm just using it to play video games on. I don't do anything else. So when you say that one's better over the other, I don't think that there really is one that's better over the other for me, but I'm sure that the people in the comments will tell us which one is better, and none of them will agree with each other. X86to-go says the Steam box is not 6 times stronger than the Steam Deck. False. Carrie tested this. There's a link to his video. That's exactly what he found. It's 6 times more performant than the Steam Deck. Valve was really honest when they said what we could expect when playing games on the Steam Deck. They said it was going to run games at 800p, 30 frames per second. That was going to be what you would get, and that is exactly what we got for the most part. With the Steam machine, they are telling us what to expect. 6 times more performance over the Steam Deck. So I don't see why we should have any reason to distrust what they're saying. Lazy Panda says SteamOS has become the de facto, the go-to operating system for all future handhelds and consoles in the living room PCs. I think that it can. In a perfect world, it could, but I don't think it has, and it might not, if that makes sense. I really like SteamOS. I like it because it has a very fast time to game, and I don't have any real complaints about it. That being said, I don't think it's the de facto anything. I also don't think that this is anywhere remotely possible unless the Steam machine is sold in stores. Until you have devices running SteamOS in stores, the average consumer is not going to pick them up. I know that Steam is huge, and most people who are playing games on PC are playing games on Steam, but most people are not interested in SteamOS. They're not interested in Linux. They just want to turn on their Windows machines and play games the way that they've always done it. And until they go into a store like Best Buy and pick up a machine and bring it home and plug it in and it's running Linux, I don't think that that's going to be something that can ever hit the mainstream, but it doesn't have to hit the mainstream. And I have an entire video about this. It is linked down below about why now is the right time for Valve to ship these Steam machines. All right, last question. Valve will announce Half-Life 3 at this year's Gaming Awards, and the game will launch with Steam Machine to incentivize sales. This comes into us from Grimstone. I think it's possible. I mean, if I were in charge over at Valve, well, they probably would have been run into the ground by now because I would have made some bad decisions. But if I were in charge over at Valve, I would have said, hey, let's get Half-Life 3 to launch with the Steam Machine. And it's still compatible with everything else. You can still buy it on other platforms. You can even get it on Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo Switch too. But it's free on Steam Machine. If you buy it on Steam Machine, it comes with Half-Life 3. That is what I would do. I hope that they do that, and I hope that they make an announcement during the Game Awards because I cannot wait to play more Half-Life, but I don't know if they will. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that that's going to happen? Let me know in the comment section down below that like button. And while you're down there, don't forget to check out Rich's video where he answered a bunch of your questions as well. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Thanks for watching. Stay rad.